Hello there, and welcome back to the podcast where I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Richard Cabut. Uh, Cabut? Yeah,
Cabot. Cabot.
Cabot, sorry, yeah.
It's actually a Polish name, and in Poland it's pronounced Cabut. But
Okay.
well, it's a French name. It's a French name. My father's side of the family originally came from France, so
Right.
it's actually a Huguenot name, and and they drifted. I mean, with all the kind of upheaval, they
Mm.
drifted all over.
They ended up everywhere, the Huguenots. Right.
Well, yeah, a lot of Shoreditch kind of happening with the Huguenot community, a few hundred years ago, but also to Poland as well. So hence, it's a French name, but via Poland. I'll
Right, yeah.
explain later. So, but here it's pronounced Cavern, but pronounce it any way you want, really. It doesn't matter.
I bet you've heard a
Whatever.
few different versions over the years.
I don't care.
Cool. Okay, so I always start with your upbringing, and basically how you think it kind of basically a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up, etc. But with specific kind of focus on how you think that sort of kind of led you to being the person you are today, essentially.
Right, okay. Well, I was born in Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, and I lived there for the first 9 months of my life until my family moved to Dunstable in Beds, which is 30 miles up the motorway from London. But Marsworth, my parents, they lived in a refugee camp. They lived in a an old American Air Force base, and they lived in barracks, and it was a community, and they lived there because they were Polish people who had escaped from the clutches of well, the Russians actually, essentially, and then found themselves in the UK. They couldn't go back to Poland because Poland, after the war, uh, was um, was controlled by the Russians, the communists, and people who did go back, who chose to. They kind of ended up not in a good way. In fact, they ended up in labor camps, which my because they didn't want the Russians didn't want these people coming back from the West, and spreading kind of all those lies. So they were lots of ways. So they couldn't go back to Poland, and the reason that they actually had lost their homeland was that both my parents' families, although they didn't know each other, they lived in the eastern part of Poland. And when the Germans invaded, shortly afterwards, the Russians invaded from the other side, from the east, and took over a prearranged kind of part of Poland, split it with the Nazis. And where my parents lived is a place called Wołyń, which is now the Ukraine, but at that time it was Poland. My dad came from a place called Równe, which these days is in the news. It's spelt slightly differently because the Ukrainians kind of changed the spelling. I don't know why, but in any case, it's in the news quite a bit. It's often kind of missile attacked because I don't know, it's a staging post or whatever. They have stuff there, and my mum, Sudkowczyzna, they lived very small villages, very, one horse kind of town, nothing going on there, believe me, apart from a lot of praying, a lot of hard work, a lot of hardship, a lot of poverty. But it was theirs, and they loved it. And they were ethnically cleansed. There was a midnight knock on the door, and the Russians basically transported. I think well, this was in 1940, and that year I think they took 2 million Polish people from that eastern part of Poland and stuck them in labor camps in Siberia, along in the cattle wagons. Nothing to eat or drink. They had to kind of break off icicles and kind of drink them to survive. Many thousands of people died, and they were put in labor camps in Siberia. But when the Germans invaded Russia, there was an amnesty. A Polish army was created under the auspices actually of the British in the Middle East. Um, and so my parents were let out. My dad joined the army, and my mum and her family followed on this massive trek by foot from Siberia all the way to the Middle East, to what was then Palestine and Iran, well, at that time Persia, where the Polish army was formed. And then afterwards, they after the war was over, they were actually kind of like sent by the Red Cross to Uganda, and then Uganda, they had a choice of going to any country they wanted really. And if part of one of your family fought in the army, the Polish army, you could come to Britain, which is what they eventually chose to do. Ended up in a place called Marsworth, this camp, this refugee camp, where they lived for years actually, from kind of 1948 right up until 1960, when I was born. And 9 months later, we kind of moved. So I grew up in a Polish family in suburbia, which was Dunstable, and that kind of had a couple of I guess very important formative effects on me. One was the kind of the Polish Catholic nature of my upbringing, which was kind of some of it was great, and some of it was absolutely appalling, um, because there were elements of a Polish background which came to be fantastic, which I came to recognize as being a fantastic gift. Which is it's a very poetic sensibility, the Polish sensibility. It's very dark, and it's very cynical, and it's very disbelieving, and it's very open to let the senses drift. The downside of that is that many people, many Polish people, they can't hack it, and they kind of turn into sort of, they use booze to maybe, try and damp it down a bit. A lot of my Polish friends from my youth, they kind of turned basically into kind of alcoholics now, which isn't a very good thing. Um, and I was brought up by my grandmother, who looked after me. My parents at work, they were always at work. And she told stories. She told a lot of Polish fables and fairy tales, which again are all dire warnings against, fate and society, and how, we've got to be, there are wolves always out in the forest. And she turned everything into a fable, and she turned everything into a myth, her stories, and they were fantastic. She could make the most mundane and banal of everyday, experience into something that was actually quite magical and important. And I'd like to think that I kind of took that and ran with it within my own work, which is a work as a writer. Um, but the downside of it, and it was also a very loving environment. I mean, it was a very caring environment. Although my parents worked all the time, etc., 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 they were always, within the parameters of parenting in the 1960s. They would, it was a stable home, which is kind of like something to kind of, hold on to. But the downside of it, the whole Polish Catholic experience, is that it's just very, very repressive. You know, sexuality and well, just anything. Just don't do it. You know, don't
If
stop.
it feels good, don't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, just don't even think about it. You just sit there and eat pierogi and be safe, and that's all you need to do. So 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 I had that, and that once I got to kind of like a certain age, and maybe saw David Bowie on television, I kind of realized that perhaps there was something beyond the parameters of just sitting and watching and eating pierogi, beyond what was prescribed by my parents and school. Uh, and I wanted into that, and I wanted out of where I was. And at the same time, the kind of exposure to Polish culture and perhaps the Polish storytelling gave me the tools to actually do that. So I broke out, and that was my upbringing, really.
So was glam rock your kind of first awareness of yeah, music mattering?
Glam rock,
Like what you said,
yeah,
Bowie, I'm thinking of
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of seeing people like David Bowie and Cockney Rebel, um, who were absolutely fantastic, and they kind of dragged me out of my torpor, really, which is kind of what one part of my upbringing was. It was designed to kind of like put you in a torpor. It was kind of like a very carbohydrate based atmosphere, if you like. It was sleepy, very, very sleepy, very repressive, very anxious and scared, and designed to make you kind of feel bad about yourself. Not like these people who are on TV who are fully 100% expressing themselves in every single way that they could think of, including, physically and, in terms of emotion, fantastic. Because, the Polish Catholic people aren't big on emotion, really. You keep it damped down, you keep it tamped down, and
Mm.
the only time you see Polish people kind of really sort of be in is when they drink, and then it's usually through fighting rather than anything else. So it's it's a good place to get to be, but it's a good place to get out of, and it's a place that I'm never going back. But yeah, yeah, glam rock, absolutely. And I remember after seeing David Bowie, I thought, wow, fantastic. And I went to the hairdresser in Dunstable, and I said, look, I want a haircut like David Bowie's. And the hairdresser said, yeah, okay. I think I can do that. I wasn't obviously not the first kid who'd been in that hairdresser asking for a David Bowie haircut, And so he did the haircut and all that. I thought, wow, that looks absolutely fantastic. But what you don't realize as a kid is all the palaver that you have to go through with hair to make it look like David Bowie, like, tons of hairspray and backcombing and all that kind of shit. So, of course, after the first kind of like half an hour of having this haircut, it's like, and it's just like any other haircut. It was kind of pointless. But it was a good start, it was a good kind of start going to that hairdressers, and you gotta incremental little steps. And
Is music is music the big sort of catalyst then from this point onwards for you, or was there other stuff?
from 1973 onwards, yeah. What was I into at that time? I think music, and I wanted to buy. I kind of bought into the whole kind of thing, really. I wanted the gestalt, as it were. I wanted the kind of mindset, and I wanted the clothes. I always thought the clothes were important and kind of fantastic. I mean, it's an outward sign of being involved in something. If you didn't kind of have the clothes, it was kind of like only half the story, as far as I was concerned, really. So, but of course, the clothes, same as the hair, the clothes were just like Dunstable Market kind of shitty seconds that you kind of got. They weren't, going down to Anthony Price in
Yeah,
King's Road or anything like that. But it's the thought that counts. It's the effort, and it's people can kind of see and it helps. It helps with that kind of attitude. So yeah, I bought into youth culture or subculture in a very big way. And I aspired to well, not to Max's Kansas City. I wouldn't have known about that at all then. But I mean, I aspired to London and what it had to offer, and the places that David went to. I wanted to go to, Bieber's or whatever. So. I was also into kind of football, into going to see, not really playing, well, playing a bit, but I used to go. Well, I still do go actually. I go to Luton Town, and of course it was and Glam was kind of funny because you went on the terraces at Luton, and there were all these people, boot boys, basically, real hard people, kind of dressing in such a kind of like a effeminate way. And it was kind of like, wow, this kind of works. I'm not sure whether it's kind of happened since, that kind of adoption of a fashion that is kind of, well, so outre and yet so accepted by a mass of people like the football guys. Did you used to go to the match at all in the
yeah,
70s? You did,
yeah,
yeah.
it is. Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
everything
So
saying
you
about
you know you remember all the guys and just looking with the David Bowie haircuts, but they were kind of like
us still
psycho.
being scary. Yeah,
Yeah, it was kind of odd. I'm not sure whether that's kind of happened since.
no, no,
But
it's a moment in time, actually, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Who did you go and see then?
Liverpool. Yeah,
Oh God, yeah, of course.
yeah, mainly away games, but occasional home games because I live in down south, But yeah, no, I saw my fair share of shenanigans, I suppose you'd say. I used to get dragged to see Chelsea as well because a mate of mine was a Chelsea fan, and he'd come with me to
Chelsea.
Liverpool matches. I'd go to Chelsea matches. Yeah,
Wow, yeah. I think Chelsea would have been kind of like one of the worst, really.
yeah,
I remember when they came to Luton in the 70s, it was utter carnage. I mean, I don't think people would who weren't there at the time. I think people wouldn't understand just how brutally violent it
mm.
was. I mean, on the terraces, and later at gigs,
Yeah, the
as
street for
well,
that matter.
in the streets, anywhere. It was so violent.
Yeah, yeah, it was. You had to always keep an eye out, didn't you? Basically, and of course, particularly if you look weird,
Yeah.
that was another kind of red rag to a bull risk you were taking, I suppose.
Well, that was sort of my entree into punk rock, really. The kind of reaction against that, because it was a dead end. I mean, all those people, all those kind of boot boy people, they were rebelling, but it wasn't. It was kind of like a dead end rebellion. It was kind of rebelling for a bit, but then you kind of, you know, you, all those people, they got jobs on the track in Vauxhall Motors in Dunstable, and you can't really keep it up with in that context, in that setting. You just become very tired. Jobs are designed to wear you out so that you've got a bit of sort of energy left in your head and your heart to, I don't know, watch TV or something, and
I
open
picked
up.
up on something you said. I think it was in another interview,
Yeah,
about being in Dunstable and people you knew, or kind of like getting a girlfriend, going around their house watching telly,
yeah,
and not talking to each other, and so on and so forth.
yeah. That's
That
exactly what happened.
Yeah, that really struck a chord with me. I think everybody knew that, but you seem to sort of be repelled by that, whereas I was just probably jealous of it, really.
You wanted that, did
No, I
you?
wanted a girlfriend.
You wanted a girlfriend.
I presumed the rest of it was just part of the package, but the girlfriend was specifically what I wanted, I think, in that
Oh,
situation.
right. Well, you can have odd girlfriends, but I just didn't. I mean, I just thought it was ludicrous that some people kind of like took it to the extent, the real kind of heavy hitters in school relationships. They would, what they'd do is they'd kind of at break times and at lunch times, they'd walk around holding hands. They'd walk around holding hands, and that kind of meant that you excluded everyone else basically, and then really they honestly did. I mean, I know couples who would go around kind of most nights to either his or her house. They'd sit watching TV. The parents would make them tea, and they'd all have tea together. And they just sit and watching TV. Sometimes they'd hold hands, and and that was it. And then they'd kind of go home, and they wouldn't have anything to say to each other. It was appalling. And I just thought that I mean, I came from a very repressive household, and I could see it for what it was, which was just another form of absolute kind of like boredom, which is one of the end results of repression. It's kind of kills you through boredom if it doesn't kill you from anything else. So it was, I just thought, fuck's sake. Honestly, really.
Do you feel like an outsider then?
Oh, always.
Yeah.
Yeah, always, always. I mean, I remember at junior school, and my grandma, or Babcha, as she was called, which is, and she was a typical kind of Polish or Eastern European little old lady, and with a headscarf and kind of bent over by her struggles and troubles, really. And she used to take me to school. She used to walk me to school, which wasn't very far. It was down the road and whatever. And I always kind of felt really sort of embarrassed that this little Eastern European lady, I mean, it was obvious she wasn't English, used to take me to school, and I was hoping that, nobody would see me. And also, I didn't speak English when I went to junior school. I had no access to the English spoken word. I had been brought up in a Polish household where they played Polish records on the gramophone, and I didn't know how to speak English. Uh, and so, I remember even now the dinner ladies saying stuff to me, teachers saying stuff to me, and I just didn't know what they were saying. And I presume that all the other kids realized that. And also, as a Catholic, in school assemblies, Catholics had to go out. You weren't allowed to sit in the daily school assembly, and you were sent out to sit in a little room, and there's only kind of like three or four of us, maybe. But I mean that experience is enough to make you feel that you are very much you don't belong, man. And I always so I didn't belong. I knew that I didn't belong to the house as society, but you know, conversely, I didn't feel at home either because I didn't, you know, I didn't like all the church stuff and the Catholic stuff. It kind of made me feel, you know, ill, really. It, you know, there was something about it. It wasn't just the fact that it was like a really, really boring thing. It was like a really oppressive thing, which I keenly felt. So I didn't feel at home anywhere. I didn't feel at home, and I didn't feel at home out of home. It wasn't really until I kind of found you know, made my way to a kind of community where I felt that I could function a little, you know, bit more easily, which was, you know, I suppose the punk community, which was kind of full of people who I think were the same as me, who were people who just didn't fit in anywhere,
Yeah.
who liked punk because you know, they'd been bullied or they'd been abused, or it was, and punk was full of all those people. It was, yeah, it was people looking for something, looking for, you know, looking for a kiss, if you like, which is, you know, which is kind of what, yeah, which is exactly what I was doing through punk rock. And I knew that punk was what I was looking for the very first time I set eyes on a picture of Johnny Rotten. I mean, I knew it, and I think that everyone who, you know, I'm not special in that sense. I'm sure that everyone, or most of us, did as well. You know.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying. Really, it was. I guess it was for me. It was a bit like sort of quiet desperation that I just didn't know what the hell my future was going to be, and that I didn't fit
Yeah.
in anywhere, etc. And then all of a sudden, it was like a door opening,
Yeah.
a door that you didn't know existed. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you knew it was kind of different from glam rock, or I mean, what was happening in Dunstable in 1975 and six was I mean, I think you might be a bit younger than me, no, but I don't know if you remember there was a swing revival happening.
well, yeah, Manhattan Transfer and all that kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I actually went to see Manhattan Transfer play in 1976 in Dunstable. But apart from that, yeah, there was a swing thing happening, which was absolutely, in a way, it was fantastic because, I mean, what you had, I mean, we had a place in Dunstable called the California Ballroom, which is famous on various circuits. So, you know, they had coaches from London coming to it to the Cali because it played the best funk music. Every funk band, big funk bands, big or small, forget it, just the funk band. They played in Dunstable, California Ballroom. So I saw the Fatback Band and War and all these kind of absolutely brilliant bands. But then this swing thing started happening, and people, you know, fashion wise, people started, and it was one of those kind of places that people talk about, like the Lacy Lady, etc., etc. But the California Ballroom was also that sort of place. So people started wearing dungarees and military gear and peg trousers rather than the Oxford bags that people kind of, you know, those big Oxford
Yeah.
bags that people wore, you know, and you had your hair cut short and, you know, you wore sailors' tops, D-mob shirts, suits from wherever you could get it, shirts, ties, all that kind of thing, which is a fantastic pre-punk fashion. I mean, it was great, and it, you know, fashion-wise, it was a direct kind of lead into punk. Of course, we don't. Everyone knows that you don't have to do. But the thing is, I mean, as much fun as it was, and it was fun. It was great, that whole kind of retro scene, 1940s swing scene. But when again you saw when you saw Johnny Rotten, really, you realised that nostalgia wasn't it. Suddenly what had seemed fantastically exciting, which was that kind of cool smoking weird, not weird cigarettes, but uh, Capstan full strength to be like the 40s guys, and all that seemed pointless. All of it seemed as though it didn't relate to your life. And what did relate to your life was the feeling that this guy exuded, through the pages of the music press, which is when I first saw a picture of Johnny Rotten, as it were.
Did you stay in Dunstable for long after the punk thing started?
No, well, not too long. I mean, that the picture I'm talking about was a specific one, and it was the Nashville picture. It was the April 1976 beat up your audience picture, and I just thought, wow, and I think I've talked about it before. It was that kind of whole idea of creative violence rather than, which is what I kind of got from that, rather than that whole idea of going to the Luton match, and that dead end destructive violence. There's a whole load of difference between the violence involved in punk rock and the Pistols and the violent feeling that they exuded, and the violence in kind of straight society. And then I moved. I mean, I knew that I had to get out, really, sort of from then. And I think the culmination, the kind of the crux of it, came at a Clash gig in early 1978. It was February 1978, and the Clash did a kind of like a secret gig in Dunstable, and it was the most violent. To this day, it was the most violent scenes I've seen. I mean, somebody took a gun into the auditorium, and the people were going in with axes, and it was a bear pit, and it was an arena for various estates in Dunstable and Luton to fight against each other, and they just used the Clash gig as a setting. And I was actually backstage, and it was really, and the Clash were kind of, worried themselves, and they were actually dropping Mogadons, which is like a downer,
Mm.
which is kind of like a weird thing for a punk band to do, but that's what they were doing. And Joe Strummer taught me the chords to White Riot, which is kind of great, really. Coming back, to think of it now, and I don't remember what those chords are. Really. I don't. I was just in awe. But I remember sitting backstage, and I remember kind of thinking, I can't take this anymore. It's really, really horrible what this has all come to, the whole sort of punk thing. But in that context, because punk spread out and it spread into places like Dunstable, and that's when the creative violence turned into something that was a continuation of that destructive and dead end violence. It had been kind of almost, it was co-opted by that sort of feeling. And I knew I had to go and find what I had originally been sparked in me somewhere else, which was kind of London. So it was 1978. I moved to London
Where'd you
town.
go in London, though?
I lived in a cold water flat in Tufnell Park,
Okay.
which I remember being £5 per week, and it was just kind of like a room, and there was There was a Calagas stove, and there was no kitchen or anything. It was just kind of like a room, really. But it was kind of good access, and that was in Muswell Hill, and it was kind of good access to places like I think that, at that time the music machine was kind of going, all that kind of scene, which was kind of good. It was exciting.
Is this when you started your fanzine?
I started that in Dunstable, and that was one of the kind of it's always good to be creative. It always leads to something. You do something and you get something back. You throw bread on the waters of life, and it comes back to you kind of threefold. And I started, which is what I found in any case, and especially creatively. And I started Kick in 1978 in Dunstable. And I was just kind of printing up a few copies, but a few copies leads to kind of other stuff, and then it kind of gets a bit more well known. I mean, it's only started off in a few hundred copies on a photocopier that somebody did at work for me, and but it gets you kind of it leads to stuff. You meet people, you kind of you encounter situations, and that's never a dead end. All these roads lead to somewhere else, and if you're lucky, that road will lead you to somewhere where you need to be at that time, which is kind of what punk rock did for me, because I met more and more people, and then I kind of started squatting, which was a whole new ball game. It was a complete kind of difference to sitting in a cold water flat in Muswell Hill, isolated. Even though you're sometimes isolation works for you because your mind is able to kind of run free without those intrusions, of parents and stuff like that, So,
Or
uh,
even peers? I absolutely get what you're saying. The more alone you are, it's not nice, but it does give you the freedom to go your own way without
yeah,
influence. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So sometimes it works quite well, yeah. And I always respected those kind of people who didn't go along with their peers, and who didn't mind doing stuff on their own. Because what happens usually is that those people, they start to get people following what they do, rather than kind of them following what other people do. And it's not really, I never think it's kind of like a great idea doing stuff that other people do when you don't really want to do it. It's always, self-harming, really. So, but when I started kind of squatting, I think that was probably a game changer, because then you meet people on a day-to-day level, a very intense kind of level, who are, if again you're lucky and you wind up in the right squad, who are creative and who are proactive and who do things, which is kind of eventually what happened to me, because I kind of met people who were exactly that, and that's always inspiring. It's always inspiring to meet people who do things, and
This
who
is to pull you
create
back up the
things.
crowds, is it?
Eventually, yeah, 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 yeah. But I also knew people who weren't quite so lucky, who lived in the most dismal of squats that you could kind of possibly imagine. I mean, the kind of places. One of the people, this girl who wrote for Kick, this French girl called Lil, she used to, for instance, this was kind of in the late 70s, early 80s. She used to live in Bob used to live in that squat in near Waterloo,
More buildings you're talking about, aren't you? Yeah.
Campbell Buildings. Well, Lil lived in a kind of sister building to that called Coronation Buildings. and it was bleak. I mean, people again, people I don't think would understand the kind of what London was like, how actually kind of bleak and angst-ridden the terrain was out there. And I mean, I liked it. I mean, I liked it as a playground. It enabled you to kind of run wild, run free without worrying too much about making things dirty and smashing things up. But Coronation Buildings, this place, I mean, you'd kind of go around there and the doors would be off the hinge because a gang of skinheads had broken in and kind of raped all the girls and kind of beaten up all the blokes. It was, these people were kind of like some sort of vigilante sort of gangs that were a law unto themselves that weren't troubled by anyone, really. They were, they were kind of gangs roaming that sort of Waterloo, waterside, dark, unlit, it was Dickensian. It was kind of beyond Dickensian, really. It was awful. It was awful. So I did know. I knew, and their answer to it, and was to kind of just take drugs all the time, and anything they could get hold of, glue, and they used to. It was that whole kind of begging scene. Do you remember that? The whole kind of punks begging kind of thing. And I always felt, I was kind of above that, really. So whenever I went to see Lil, it was kind of like, oh God, I'm gonna have to go begging across Waterloo Bridge, and it was a palaver.
We're
So
getting into
yes, I was
a
very
tricky area there. Sorry.
sorry. Yeah, so I was very grateful for the scene, and which I somehow found myself kind of in, which eventually became that, as it's known now, that Kill Your Pet Puppy collective scene. But it was based around the Anarchy Centre in Wapping, and then in Central Iberico
Mm, mm, mm.
around then. Which again was just kind of like people doing things to themselves. I mean, the music was kind of rubbish, but I mean, that was never really the point as far as I'm concerned.
Luckily, yeah. Yeah. We're getting into an interesting sort of time period now, aren't we? Where punk rock is kind of beginning to split off into all these different things, as you almost touched on there, really, I suppose. We're kind of, you're getting the more creative people in one respect, and you're getting the kind of people who hung around the King's Road getting their photos taken.
Yeah,
And it's all kind of leading up to that punk revival where you're getting all the kind of leather and studs and Mohicans type bands coming in, so on and so forth. At this
yeah.
point, you're by this point you're working for NME. Would that be right? That's a place Kick has led you.
Yeah, I started working for the enemy fairly early on in the game actually, which was 1982, and and I was working for the enemy, but not only as a freelancer. I
Mm,
mean,
mm.
and then kind of loads of other magazines. But I mean, again, I didn't really feel at home there. Always felt like an outsider. I didn't feel good about going into the office and talking to people. I found the people at the music mags very boring. And it was really because I think I've never kind of thought of myself as a critic. In fact, I mean, I always not despised, but I didn't kind of like the idea of being a critic or critics, really. And the reason for that was I think that I always kind of thought of writing or my writing as a piece of art in itself, without being too overstating or pretentious, maybe, I always kind of imagined it, and it was probably more in my imagination at that time than anything else, but I always kind of imagined it as a kind of companion piece to the music or the gig that I had been to. I considered myself not as a critic, but actually as part of the event, the performance, the whole, the whole 9 yards of being there. And I mean, I enjoyed those kind of punk groups to the extent that it wasn't really about them. It wasn't really about the music, and it was about the lifestyle. And I knew that I enjoyed that, and I knew that I was part of that, and that's what I kind of wanted any kind of art in terms of writing to reflect. And I thought, the whole kind of critic game was just boring, chin stroking, and kind of tedious, and you know I didn't really like opinions particularly, even though I kind of am used to giving opinions and I'm used to writing them as such. I kind of think I mean, there's a thing about opinions where, there's I forget who it is now, but he put it quite nicely and quite well. But opinions are kind of like, forget opinions, don't give me opinions. Opinions are stultifying, and they're stultifying because what happens with opinions when you kind of give them is that they become traps for you. You give them, and then forevermore, you're the person in your own mind and others who thinks this. Well, that all changes. I don't think the same thing about anything that I thought, last week, never mind, 5 years ago.
It's even more solidified with the internet, of course, isn't it? Where people can
Yeah,
find these quotes and stuff.
yeah. So, yeah, for that reason, I never fitted into the whole kind of music press sort of thing. It wasn't nice. I mean, you did all that, didn't you? I mean,
I did, and I also didn't really felt like, and this was later on. I'm talking 1989 when I started, but I
right.
yeah. When I look back on it, I think I was massively intimidated by everybody else, by their confidence, uh, they seem to be from a different world to me, and a lot of that might be projection, of course. But yeah, I never relaxed into it. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, no, me neither, me neither.
We've got inevitably onto the positive punk article, I think, because it's you were the person who gave that. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. But my memory is that you were the person who called it positive punk in the article you wrote for something or other. Is that
Well, what happened was that the bands that I started writing about in 1982 were people who would go on to be called at some point positive punk bands, probably by me. But I mean, so I'd be going to see bands like I don't know, Sex Gang Children or Southern Death Cult and all those kind of people, and so I'd be kind of reviewing them. And I mean, they weren't goth, but they were kind of pre-goth.
mm,
Bands like Ritual and UK Decay were very much a favorite, and they'd be kind of singing about darker things, which kind of appealed to my Polish upbringing, I suppose. Really, that's where it kind of came from. So I loved them. I loved all that stuff, at that time, and I'd be writing about it, and they kind of enjoyed me writing about it at the Enemy because nobody else did. Really. And then, so I was called into the office, the editor's office, Neil Spencer, who was a really nice guy, but he had this record player in his office, and on it he'd written no rock and roll after 1958 to be played on this record player. It'd only play kind of reggae or soul or funk and everything like that, which I thought was one of the most pretentiously stupid things that I'd ever seen in my life. But he was a nice guy and he was very open to stuff. And he said, all these bands that you've been kind of writing about, in the live pages, what have they all got in common? And I said, well, they're all because at that time you had the kind of oi Gary Bushell oi bands, who were the kind of people that I left Dunstable in 1978 for skate, which is just that kind of boot boy violence kind of rubbish, and they were horrible and awful people. But then, and also they so you had them, and you had the people that we've talked about. I talked about it was kind of like the druggy type of dregs of society punks, who'd pretty much given up and devoted their lives to just kind of taking Tuinol or glue, which in the end it's just you may as well have just stayed in suburbia and or
Watch
wherever
telly.
people can and watch telly, because it's the same effect really. That whole lifestyle might take a bit longer to kill you, but it will surely kill you all the same as the way that the glue and stuff is. And but these bands that I was going to see, which was, Blood and Roses, Brigandage, something, Specimen, even, the Batcave started by that time. The Batcave wasn't, when I first started going there, it wasn't how people think of it now. It wasn't, full of ghouls. It was cool. It was kind of like this multimedia hangout. It was it used to have rappers there and kind of reggae toasters, and it was, all sorts of music. It wasn't just kind of, trashy stuff. But in any case, so these bands I was going to see at the time, and what I felt I was part of in that community, was something very forward looking, something that still had a heart, something that, and by heart, I mean, a conscience as well. And, the idea that change is important, that was the pulse in our heart and souls at that time and kind of going onwards. So you still had that, but these people knew how to have fun, and they knew how to have fun without kind of totally fucking themselves up, and they looked great, compared to the skinhead guys and the mod guys, which is the mod guy. I mean, I like sort of the look of mods in the 1960s, but that again, that whole nostalgia thing I'd got over in the sort of before punk had happened. So but these guys were very modern. The people that I felt I was part of, in the sense that they were contemporary with, but with a heart. So not contemporary for the sake of it, which was the kind of new romantic slant. Yes, they looked sort of weird and different and all that kind of stuff, but they didn't have the gravitas that I felt that my scene had, with people trying to, create a sense of anarchy, and also talking about issues that weren't just, how to put on lipstick, which was important as well, but, talking about, proper sort of issues.
It was softer too, wasn't it? There wasn't so much kind of massive DM boots, and there was a lot of makeup, and
Hmm.
it was less macho, I suppose, than the kind of Kings Road type punks or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, better. Just they look better. It was. more stylish, more, it was cooler. That's all there was to it,
Mm.
than all the Kings Road punks. To kind of like, it wasn't Kings Road punks, the people who shopped in the seditionaries or whatever. It was, you're
No,
talking about the studs and begging for 10p's on the benches, those kind of punks. Yeah, yeah,
that's what I'm thinking of.
drinking kind of
Yeah,
like cider
yeah.
at 9 o'clock in the morning, that kind of business. Well, not nine. You wouldn't get people getting up at 9 for any reason whatsoever.
No
But
one did that.
no, I did.
I draw the line somewhere.
So I said to Neil Spencer, well, and I said all this really, and I said, and really they're just kind of like, positive, about, life, and, I probably said something really stupid like, anarchy, rebellion. I mean, it was kind of, we did have rebellion in our hearts still, And he said, "Well, let's do a piece. Let's do a piece about all this." And he is the one. Although I'd mentioned the word positive, he's the one who kind of pulled it out and said, "Let's call it positive punk." So Neil Spencer is the guy to blame for that, really. I still get. He does. He's like a astrologer now.
Oh,
In
right.
I think he lives around your neck of the woods. He lives out towards Brighton these days.
Oh, cool. Okay, right, yeah. Yeah.
He's got. I think he tried to get into the whole kind of film world, but I haven't heard anything about how he got on. But I know I get. You can subscribe to a monthly email from Neil Spencer. He'll send you your stars for the month, and yeah, I always quite enjoy it. And as I say, he's a nice guy.
Working with different kinds of stars these days, I suppose.
Yeah,
So
right.
then you join Brigandage. I guess that's the next part of the timeline, is it?
I joined Brigandage because Michelle got booted out of her own band by the other members, really. So yeah, I was going out with her at the time. I think we lived together at the time even. And so she said, "Yeah, you can play bass." And I said, "Right," thinking I hadn't picked up a musical instrument in my life, never mind playing bass for a renowned punk rock band. But it was easy, I'm sure these things, they're not, it's not kind of like, wow, rocket science. You can pick these things up
Hmm.
quite easily, can't you?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
You still play guitar?
I play guitar every day, but not massively in public, particularly. It's for an audience of one these days, really. Yeah,
So playing that counts.
it is. It's for me. It's like meditation essentially. I just lose myself. I play a lot of reggae on the guitar, simply because it is that kind of pace where you can just lose yourself and disappear. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's one of those kind of tenets of, is it Buddhism, or it's like learning an instrument is one of the tenets of it. For various reasons. I mean, mindfulness being kind of one of them, and also then breaking down the kind of logic of these things is another. But yeah, definitely. And of course, one of the top positive punk pans were Flowers in the Dustbin, weren't they?
Well, if you say so.
I
Yeah.
think I think you should be co-opted into the positive punk movement.
Well, we had hair crimpers, which was kind of pretty much the qualification, I would say. And I wore makeup on stage at that
I
point.
remember you. I remember the crimped hair and the makeup. Yeah,
Yeah. It's
it
funny,
was.
isn't it? The photos from those days are so kind of, in my case, certainly, I don't know about you, but they're so selective. There's whole kind of looks I had that are just unrecorded, and then there's other looks that I'd forgotten I had that I see on the internet occasionally. Haircuts, really, I'm talking about, I suppose.
yeah. It's all good fun, isn't it, really? But it didn't
What's
last so long, did it? Whole positive punk movement, as it were. The movement
no,
wasn't a
no, it's
movement.
fun, isn't it? I mean, I suppose you had Southern Death Cult went on to be the Cult, which was definitely a large step away from all that, and Sex
Yeah.
Gang Children just seem to cease to exist, or at least in my radar, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I got bored with those bands kind of almost instantly, really. I mean, I don't think those kind of those parts of culture. I mean, they're kind of good when they're ephemeral. They're good when things keep moving. It's good when things are fluid and people
Yeah.
turn to other people and other bands come along. I mean, you're not meant to love these bands for it. I mean, it's for the moment. It's what it was, and that's great.
But the internet again has seemed to sort of freeze these moments, hasn't it? There's whole swathes of people across the world now who are fans of these moments. People
Yeah,
who are thousands of miles and decades away from those moments
yeah,
are are kind of into those moments from a sort of voyeuristic point of view, I guess. Which it sounds more critical than I mean it. I don't really mean it to sound like it's a bad thing necessarily, but it's a very different thing, isn't it? Because we were just looking for the next thing back in those days, or enjoying the moment, wondering where the next moment was going to be, never imagining that it would be frozen in time in YouTube videos or photos,
yeah.
something called the internet, I suppose.
Yeah. I know. Well, I mean, I mean, do you think that that is? Do you think it's important to have that as a place and a sense of history, or do you think that it's kind of a it's ultimately kind of parasitical in a way? I mean, that kind of
It's both.
appreciation of culture. You think it's
I think it's
both?
both. I think if people are going to record history, then we should have our say to an extent. However, there is a kind of whole industry built up around that now, which I find a bit odd, personally.
Well, what you have? I mean, I always kind of like whenever I'm asked by people, do you think punk's dead or not? Which people actually do ask that question. Do you think it's dead? Which is like it's kind of like a bit of a weird question until you kind of start thinking about it and start thinking about your own kind of response and taking a step back from yourself and thinking, well, what did I ever find important about punk in the first place? And you have to kind of go back to those kind of roots again. And I mean, the thing that I found important about it was exactly the thing that we've been talking about, which was the fact that punk actually just provided a roadmap to an alternative future. You didn't have to settle for the future that you had and or that had been prescribed to you. And that was the importance of punk. And punk did that
Mm,
by connecting a load of kind of like wonderful things, like politics and sex and trousers and tower blocks and everything and as life and time moved on, then those different signposts, there became more of them. So you kind of started, looking at kind of amplified ideas that perhaps are only apparent on a kind of feeling level, to start with. But then, more that you delved, the further you went down these roads. I'm talking about situationism, maybe, which you didn't kind of know what situationism was in 1976, or at least I didn't,
mm, mm.
And anarchy, I didn't know what anarchy was in the slightest. But so all these kind of signposts to a to different futures. I mean, those things are still important to me. Those things are still interesting. I'm still trying to get my head around, elements of, well, just those elements that those ideas conjure, and the art surrounding it, and the feelings surrounding it. I'm still trying to get to get my head around it. So, in that sense, and for me, that was punk rock. No, it's not dead at all. I still kind of like feel as though it's like in myself like a forward movement. I'm always kind of finding roots that perhaps began back there in a sense. So no, in that respect, I don't feel that punk is dead, but I think that one kind of sure sign that actually a culture is pretty much petrified is when kind of academia perhaps has uh, plays a big part in that culture, and then also the kind of internet based fandom. And I think that it's kind of a little bit uh, because that's becomes very objective, and then it becomes kind of something that's quite boring,
Mm.
basically objective and objectified, and then it becomes a form of nostalgia, which is exactly what those two things have created, a nostalgia industry, which you can kind of see really expressed most vociferously on Facebook, and the way that people react on that specific medium or format. So yeah, um,
Do you think we're contributing to it in this chat?
no, Gerard, because we're telling the truth. No,
Okay.
we're two guys talking about our kind of experiences, as it were. We're not pushing any kind of agenda. I don't think. Do you have an agenda?
My agenda is to just get these chats out there because I found myself starting to listen to a lot of podcasts, particularly a guy called James English, who does a lot of interviews with ex gangsters. And they're very interesting, but I couldn't help thinking that there was probably better people for me to listen to the opinions of, essentially, when I was like lying, because I tend to just put them on when I'm in bed as I go to sleep.
Yeah.
And I just thought, since I can't find any podcasts that are doing that, I'll sort of do one basically. So that's as much of an agenda as there is, really. I guess.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. I think you get interesting things out of it. I mean, you're not selling anything as kind of something that's kind of rooted in one thing or another. I think it sounds
Yeah, yeah. So what did you do?
it sounds like a kind of forum, really, which
Yeah,
is nice. I mean,
yeah. So I've never got any set questions or anything really, apart from start with the upbringing and see where it takes us. So where did you go on the subject of where it takes people? There is a point really where everybody stopped hanging around together, and before the internet hooked people back up. So what were you doing then?
um, I didn't last very long at the NME. Well, actually, that's a lie. I lasted quite a long time at the NME, but not in any kind of huge way. I kept on doing kind of live reviews, album reviews, and all that kind of business. And I also did stuff for kind of Zigzag and Punk Lives for a short while that kind of lasted. And those kind of magazines. There's a magazine called Offbeat, which was done by Dave Henderson. Do you know him from Sounds? You did Sounds, didn't you? Do you remember Dave Henderson? He
No,
edited.
I only seen the name when I was buying it. No, I didn't know.
Right. Oh, okay, you bought it, did you? Wow. Okay. That's good. I didn't realize that it was kind of even really available out. But he's a kind of like a. They're not IPC. It was Spotlight, wasn't it? I don't know what it is now. I think Bauer own absolutely everything, don't they? But at the time, he was kind of like a. He's like a bit. He's still a big mover and shaker in that kind of music biz industry type of thing. And but this was the kind of after he left Sounds, he did a magazine called Offbeat. But in any case, the point is that I worked for those kind of magazines, and I'd had enough. My heart wasn't in it. You kind of there wasn't any money in it, and I only did it ever because I loved it. I loved the scene, and I kind of loved what I was kind of writing about. But then I found that I didn't kind of love it anymore, really, and I found it kind of boring, and it's kind of like pointless faking it because, as I said, there's no money in it, so why bother? And I got a proper job. I got one of the, although the music business or the music press uh there was no money in it. What it did do is it gave you kind of like a bit of kudos, and it was something to put on your CV, and especially at the time, the New Musical Express was quite well regarded in certain circles, and it kind of tickled the fancy of people. And I got a job at the BBC as a features writer, which I kind of did for 10 years, and that happened at the end of the 80s, basically. So I worked there for kind of 10 years, and but again, it's that kind of thing. I just didn't feel part of it. I didn't feel part of BBC culture. I hated working in an office. I hated the it's not so much I hated the people personally, but I hated kind of. Have you ever worked in an office? It's like school. People have cliques and they talk about each other behind their backs, and especially at the BBC, it's all kind of pointing and making plots, and it was dismal, really. But I did it, and I did it for kind of 10 years, and it was kind of like, but that was enough. And then I kind of wangled. One of the good things about the BBC was that they have these kind of, it's a bureaucracy, and it's like very hard to kind of break down. But once you know how it works, you can use it to your own advantage. So I wanted redundancy, and they were kind of making people and departments redundant. This was kind of like towards the end of the 90s, but they never made me redundant, and it always pissed me off. But then then I found out a little known rule at the BBC that if a person in one department is made redundant, and another person in another department can do that job, you can swap with that person, and they can't stop you doing it either. So I kind of I plucked someone from another department and swapped my non-redundancy for her redundancy. And the other good thing about the BBC is that they gave really good redundancy money. It was one of those things where you pay in some money, but then they pay in, tons more, which I get now, you know, which was great. And then after that, I struck out on my own. I went back to freelancing. I worked as a ghostwriter, working for this company based out in Switzerland, and which was kind of boring, but kind of not, because you learn new skills and you learn how to do different things, and you learn how to think a little bit differently in terms of your writing and your analytic capabilities and sensibilities, which is kind of what it did. And also, they paid a lot of money, which, for one reason or another, becomes kind of important as time goes on,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
especially if you've got kids. And after that, I had the wherewithal. It gave me a good basis to kind of do whatever I wanted, really, which is kind of brings us, I guess, to the here and now, which
To your books.
yeah, which is kind of what I do now. I write various things really, but I've got two projects that are kind of happening next year. And one of them is a book called Looking for a Kiss, which came out in its first edition a couple of years ago. And really, it's kind of pretty relevant to the conversation we're having now and today, because the book is a work of fiction, but it has an element of truth in it. And we're talking kind of experiential truth here, and experiential truth is something that goes straight to the heart, and it enables you to move kind of forward as a person. And facts sometimes bear no relevance to that. So even though it's a truth, it may not be factual. So it's a work of fiction, and it covers the kind of arc that two people are find themselves on. It's a girl and a boy, and the arc that the point of the arc that they find themselves on in both their personal and cultural lives is that what they have invested all of their time and emotion in, which was punk rock, no longer no longer works for them. People have moved on. Everything's moved on. And they find themselves at the point where they are looking for a future. They're looking for a kiss. They're looking for salvation. And the book itself covers within a short space of time, really. It goes backwards and forwards and all over the place in terms of past, future, and present. The book is a journey about seeking a future and seeking a way out personally and culturally, and it brings in all the points of reference that we used, that we had at the time, which was, the drugs, and the fashion, and just the excitement, the sheer excitement, and the sheer boredom, all of it. But that came out, and it did really well, actually. I mean, people liked it, and it got really good reviews all over the place. And to the extent that it was picked up quite recently by another publishing company called PC Press. Do you know them? Do you know Pete Webb?
Web, yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah.
Right. So they put out Melissa Chenham's Massive Attack book, and the Test Department book, and the Killing Joke book, and they're great, because Pete, they're a small company, but they've got a nationwide distribution, and it'll go to places. And I strongly believe that culture has a way of kind of getting to where it needs to go. And so I'm very happy that PC Press are putting it out next year in an amended and extended edition. And and the other great thing about it is that because it kind of because it does deal with that kind of idea of experiential truth. I think that enabled it to pretty much hit home with people, and that's why people liked it. And the screenwriter in Seattle is currently writing a screenplay based on Looking for a Kiss, and it's with the aim, and he has he's experienced, and he's experienced in the American film circuit. So what you have in America is this kind of film festival circuit,
Mm.
and it's not one or two things, it's a whole kind of thing, you know, of film festivals, and he is part of that. And he's also an Oscar winner, and he's actually writing. I think he's kind of close to finishing. It'll be kind of probably finished in December to then interact with production companies. Um,
Is that when you try and flog it at that stage when it's written? Is it? It's not flogged already, I'm trying to say.
it's not flogged already, but it's flogged in regard to the script. So the script is taken care of. So then, you know, hopefully with luck, that will kind of, you know, that will move forward, which is great.
Oh yeah.
And then the other project that's coming to fulfillment next year is a book of verse called Disorderly Magic and Other Disturbances, which kind of it's that has been picked up by an American New York company called Far West. And again, they're brilliant. They're brilliant people. Yeah, and they have again, they've got nationwide distribution in America, and the kind of thought of having your book of verse, you know, available in some kind of one horse town in, you know,
Yeah.
Ohio.
Waiting for a kid like you in Dunstable to read it.
Well, that's it. Well, that's it. And it's a very, I think it's a very exciting book, and an exciting avenue for me, because after writing nonfiction and novel, to write a book of verse is fantastic, and to have it kind of recognized as something worthwhile and worth pushing out to One Horse Town, Ohio, it's great. And I mean, if it's, I've got a copy. I can't show it to you because this is a proof copy, but it's a pop meditation on speed, delirium, distance, disillusion, urbanity, madness, disillusion, memory, mourning, forgetting, hauntology, hauntings, rapid transit, the non-existent, and conjuring the future, which I kind of think is probably everything that we've talked about in this show. And
Very
I
good.
think that, you know, I think it will be great. The whole, I mean, you know, I'm not just talking about the book, but I think the whole kind of thing.
Fantastic.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's what I'm
Yeah.
doing. That's what I'm doing,
Oh,
man. And a bit of, you know, a bit of yoga and a bit of, you know,
no, you do yoga, yeah?
filming. Yeah, Iyengar. I do quite a lot actually. I do about 3 classes a week and some at home.
All right.
I don't drink, or I don't go out to the pub or anything like that much. You know, so I do, you know, I love that. Yeah.
Gets you out of the house. That's such a flippant thing
Okay,
to say
yeah.
about yoga, but there we go.
Keeps me off the wandering the streets, you know, which is kind of good. And I'm still, you know, I still go and see the kind of art stuff, and I'm still part of an artistic community, as it were, which I think is kind of important. I mean, you know, that whole kind of, you know, what we were talking about, that sort of sense of isolation. You can become grounded. I mean, people kids these days say based, don't they? I kind of wonder what the hell they're talking about, but it's like they say based, which basically means you're kind of grounded, and it's good to have a best of both worlds to go out as well, see new things, meet new people, and all that kind of business. So that's all I do, you know. It's kind of that's
Well,
kind of
we
it, really.
that's quite a bit, isn't it? We got through quite a lot. I think that's probably a good place to wind it up. I'll stay on after I finish recording and thank you properly. But for the purposes of this podcast, thank you very much, Richard. And yeah, really
Well,
fascinating
thank you, Gerard. It's been great. It's always lovely to chat with you, and
likewise, mate.
we'll do it again sometime, maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah, part two, the sequel in the new year or something like that. Cheers.
Namaste.